Michael Green had always known who he was. 30 years as a fire chief had made it easy, uniform purpose identity. He was the one people called when things were burning broken or lost. His name mattered. His presence meant safety. His life had shape. Now he wakes up at the same hour, 5 a.m. But there are no alarms, no radios, no team waiting on his command. Just the quiet hum of a refrigerator and the ache in his knees. The house is empty. His son lives 2 states away. His ex-wife hasn't called in years. The shelves he once filled with framed commendations now gather dust beside unopened mail. One morning he pulls out his old fire coat, slips it on. It still fits, but he doesn't. In the mirror he sees the outline of someone he used to be. Then without warning he sinks to the floor and begins to cry, not for the job, but for the man who only knew how to matter by saving others. If I'm not that he whispers, then who the hell am I? And in that question, raw, breathless, unanswered, his real story begins. Not with the uniform, but with the silence that comes after it's gone. Michael tried to outrun the silence the way he used to outrun fire. At first he filled his days with noise, fixing the fence, repainting the walls, rearranging furniture no one sat on. He volunteered at a food bank, joined a neighborhood watch, even considered starting a YouTube channel about home safety. But none of it stuck. Everything felt like a performance without an audience. When the applause of a role fades, the echo doesn't satisfy. His son Ethan called once every couple of weeks. Their conversations felt strained, surface deep. Ethan talked about work, the kids, his wife's new promotion. Michael tried to sound upbeat, tried to offer advice, but Ethan didn't seem to want it. One evening, Michael asked gently if he could visit for a few weeks, help out around the house, spend time with the grandkids. Ethan hesitated. "Dad, we don't really have space right now," he said, then added, "Maybe this is a time for you to figure out what's next for you." The sentence landed like a stone in Michael's chest. He wasn't asking to be rescued. He was asking not to be forgotten. That night, he took down a box from the top shelf of his closet, old photos, medals, newspaper clippings, letters from families he'd helped. He sat for hours on the living room floor, sorting through ghosts. These weren't just memories. They were proof that he had been needed, respected, seen. But now the images felt like stories from someone else's life. He didn't feel like that man anymore. In the weeks that followed, Michael began noticing how invisible he felt in public. At the grocery store, people cut in front of him like he wasn't there. A cashier talked over him to greet the next customer. In line at the pharmacy, a man bumped him and didn't apologize. Michael had once been the man who cleared rooms with his presence. Now he moved through them like air. It was in that haze of disconnection that he wandered into a community center one Thursday afternoon. A flyer on the bulletin board read, "Men's Circle, Rediscovering Self Beyond Work." He stood there staring at it longer than he intended. Then he walked in. The room smelled like old coffee and new carpet. A dozen chairs circled the center. The facilitator, a calm man in his 40s, invited everyone to introduce themselves without mentioning their job. When it was Michael's turn, he froze. Without his role, he didn't know what to say. Finally, he muttered, "I'm Mike. I live alone. I like dogs." He felt ridiculous. After the session, a man named Paul approached him. Paul had been a construction foreman for nearly 30 years before being laid off. "Without the hard hat, I don't know who I am anymore," Paul said. Michael nodded. No advice, just recognition. They sat in the parking lot for half an hour talking about retirement redundancy and the strange ache of being unneeded. Paul invited him to a meditation class that met twice a week at a nearby Buddhist center. Michael scoffed at the idea he wasn't a sit-in-silence kind of guy, but with nothing to lose, he went. The first session was uncomfortable. The stillness felt loud. His thoughts raced like alarms. He couldn't stop checking the clock. But something about the teacher, Dana, kept him from leaving. She didn't say much, but what she did say stayed with him. You are not your usefulness. You are not your resume. These are costumes. Let's see what's underneath. He didn't understand it. He didn't even like it. But he came back. In the following weeks, Michael began to unlearn himself. Each meditation session peeled back a layer of habit, his need to offer solutions, to give advice, to be the one in charge. He started sitting in his kitchen without the radio. He stopped interrupting silence with busyness. He took walks without destination. One morning he watched a squirrel drag a slice of pizza across the sidewalk for almost 10 minutes. No phone, no distraction, just observation, just breath. And in that absurdly ordinary moment, he felt something shift. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't fixing anything. And yet he felt real. He started journaling again. Not about accomplishments, but about sensations. The smell of toast, the sound of leaves tapping the window, the warmth of tea in a chipped mug. The more he noticed, the more he existed. Still, there were days the old voice returned. You're wasting time. Do something. Be someone. On those days, he fought the urge to sign up for everything again. He knew now that busy was just another disguise for fear. One afternoon after meditation, Dana approached him. You look different, she said. He shrugged. Still don't know who I am. She smiled. Good. That means you're getting closer. He didn't laugh, but he felt it, the strange, uneasy liberation of loosening your grip on a self you outgrew long ago. And so Michael began to exist, not as Captain Green, not as the retired hero or the forgotten man, but simply as someone who had survived the collapse of identity and lived to feel the wind again. Michael had started to find a rhythm, quiet mornings, slow walks, simple meals. But it still felt fragile, like a vase balanced on the edge of a table. Any sudden thought or unexpected reminder could send him spiraling. That's how it happened one night. He found his old turnout gear while cleaning the garage. The coat still smelled faintly of smoke and adrenaline like memory embedded in fabric. He didn't mean to put it on, but he did. And then he just stood there staring at himself in the mirror, waiting to feel like someone again. He didn't. He felt like a man playing dress-up in his own past. He poured a second glass of scotch. Then a third. It was the first time in years he'd done that. Alone in his kitchen, he sank into the chair and let the numbness roll over him. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there, as if waiting for the weight of the past to either crush him or disappear. Neither happened. The next morning, hungover and hollow, Michael did something strange. He showed up early at the meditation center. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just sat. And that simple act, quiet and raw, was the most honest thing he'd done in weeks. Dana noticed. She placed a cup of ginger tea beside him and said nothing. He drank slowly, hands trembling slightly. For the next hour, he sat through the entire session without shifting once. After class, Dana pulled a small folded flyer from her bag. We're hosting a retreat next weekend. It's focused on silence presence and learning how to listen again. Michael didn't say yes, but he took the flyer. And 3 days later, he packed a small overnight bag and went. The retreat was held in a rustic building near the woods. No phones, no clocks, no talking. The schedule was simple: sitting, walking, eating, resting. At first, it unnerved him. Meals were taken in silence. Participants bowed before they stood up or sat down. Even flushing the toilet felt ceremonial. But something began to shift on the second day. During a walking meditation, Michael found himself trailing behind an older woman who moved slowly, deliberately, her hand grazing the leaves of every low-hanging branch. There was no urgency, no destination, just motion without force. He mimicked her pace, and something loosened in his chest. That evening he sat outside on a wooden bench, watching the trees sway against the dusk sky. A teacher walked by and asked softly, "What are you learning?" Michael thought for a long moment before answering. "That I've been sprinting for so long I forgot how to walk." The teacher nodded. "Most people do. That's why they fall apart when they finally stop." The final morning of the retreat, the group gathered for one closing reflection. Each person was invited to share one sentence or just a word if they wished. When it was Michael's turn, he hesitated. Then he said, "I think I'm finally hearing myself again." On the drive home, the world looked different. Not brighter, just slower. He noticed things he hadn't seen in years, cracks in the sidewalks, birds nesting in gutters the way sunlight filtered through dusty windows. He didn't go back to volunteering, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't need it to feel valid anymore. He still showed up for others, but only when it came from stillness, not obligation. A few weeks later, he ran into Luce, again the former ICU nurse, who now delivered groceries and practiced calligraphy. She was sitting outside the center sketching characters with a brush pen on rice paper. "Still showing up?" she asked. "Still sitting," he said. They shared tea under a tree. Luce talked about how calligraphy had taught her to trust her hands again. "I used to do everything fast," she said, "even healing. But ink doesn't like force. If you push too hard, it bleeds." Michael watched her draw one slow, curved line. "Maybe that's how I lived, too much pressure, not enough breath." Luce smiled. "That's how a lot of us lived. It's not your fault. But it is your choice now." They began meeting every Saturday, sometimes walking, sometimes painting, mostly being quiet together. One afternoon, Luce brought up a community group she'd been attending. It was for caregivers, frontline workers, and others who had lost roles or relevance after the pandemic. "You should come," she said. "You don't have to speak, just be there." Michael hesitated, then agreed. The first meeting was in a church basement, linoleum floors, folding chairs, lukewarm coffee. The stories he heard made his own loss feel both smaller and more connected. A teacher who couldn't go back to the classroom. A single mother who lost her cleaning job and now cared full-time for her sick father. A man with long COVID who couldn't climb stairs without gasping. And then there was Tameka, a black woman in her late 30s, formerly a home health aide. She spoke quietly, but each word landed like a truth bomb. "I gave people baths, fed them, held their hands while they died. I was invisible when I did it, and now I'm still invisible." Michael looked at her. He wanted to speak to apologize for all the ways the world overlooks people like her. But instead he just nodded. She saw him see her, and that was enough. After the meeting, they spoke outside. Tameka smoked, while Michael leaned against the brick wall. "You're the fireman, right?" she asked. Was he said, "Now I'm just someone who makes very slow tea." She laughed. "That's not a bad thing to be." On the drive home, Michael thought about the word was, how easily it becomes a cage. He didn't want to live in the past tense anymore. Later that week, he returned to his journal, but instead of writing about what he missed, he wrote about what he was noticing: the rhythm of breath during walking meditation, the weight of his feet on dry leaves, the softness in his chest when someone let their guard down near him. He wasn't becoming someone new. He was shedding what no longer fit. And as the days passed, he realized something quietly radical. There was nothing left to prove. Not to his son, not to his community, not even to himself. The man who used to fight fire was now learning how not to fight his own reflection. And in that, there was peace. Autumn arrived gently, as if the world itself had begun to slow down alongside Michael. Mornings were colder now, and he welcomed the chill. It gave shape to the quiet. He had developed a routine, not rigid, not scheduled, but held together by small, mindful acts. He rose early, not because he had to, but because he wanted to witness the stillness before the world stirred. He made tea with care. He sat by the window and watched the wind move through the trees. One morning he noticed the light slanting across his kitchen table and realized he hadn't thought about being useful in days. That awareness startled him. It wasn't a declaration, not a moment of triumph, but more like the easing of an ache he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. He spent more time with Luce. They never defined what they were, companions, maybe, or simply fellow wanderers learning how to live without performing. Some days they painted together in silence. Other days they shared stories from their pasts, but always with the understanding that neither needed to be impressive anymore. One afternoon, while sitting on her porch, Luce handed Michael a fresh piece of rice paper and a brush. "Try it," she said. Michael hesitated. "I've never been good at this kind of thing." "That's the point," she replied. "It's not about being good, it's about being honest." He dipped the brush into the ink and drew a simple line, uneven, a little shaky, but steady in its intent. For the first time in years, he did something creative, without the expectation of mastery. The line didn't need to be perfect. It only needed to be real. That night he reflected in his journal. "Today I let my hand move before my head had time to judge." Maybe that's what living is: action, without fear of being measured. At the community group, Michael had started holding space for others, not leading, not teaching, but simply showing up. He greeted people, set up chairs, made coffee. These were small, invisible acts, but they rooted him. Tameka began arriving early to help him set up. They didn't talk much, but there was comfort in the shared silence. One morning as they unstacked chairs, she said, "You seem softer these days." Michael looked up and smiled. "Maybe I just stopped pretending to be made of stone?" She nodded. Stone cracks, soft bends. It stayed with him. Later that week, he bumped into Jordan, a young firefighter he had trained years ago. They met by chance outside the grocery store. Jordan looked surprised and happy to see him. "Man, I miss working with you. You were solid, always calm. Everyone listened when you talked." Michael thanked him, and they chatted for a few minutes. But something felt different, not in Jordan, but in himself. He didn't feel the need to light up with pride or nostalgia. He appreciated the memory, but didn't feel the ache to return to it. As they parted, Jordan asked, "Do you miss it?" Michael paused. "Some parts, but not the noise." Jordan looked puzzled. Michael added, "I thought the noise meant I mattered. But lately I'm learning there's a different kind of meaning in quiet." When he got home, he sat on the porch with a blanket and a warm mug. His dog curled at his feet. He watched a leaf spin to the ground, its fall unremarkable but complete. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't take a photo. He just watched it land. And in that moment, he understood something he'd never fully grasped in all his years of rushing into fires. Some things are saved not by action, but by attention. He no longer felt like a man recovering from a fall. He felt like someone walking toward something unmarked, unnamed, but grounded. Over the next few weeks, he began helping Dana facilitate small breakout sessions at the meditation center. Nothing formal. She called it holding space. He didn't teach. He didn't advise. He simply listened, and when appropriate shared a fragment of his story, not the version wrapped in accomplishment, but the version still unfolding. The participants responded. They didn't want perfection. They wanted honesty. One young woman recently divorced told him, "I thought I had to rebuild everything. But maybe I just need to be still for a while." He nodded, remembering the night he sat on his kitchen floor in his old fire coat, searching for someone he no longer was. That memory no longer haunted him. It reminded him of how far he'd come. Eventually, Dana asked if he'd like to lead a session not as an authority but as a witness to change. Michael declined at first, but she smiled knowingly. Sometimes the most powerful words come from the quietest mouths. When he finally agreed, the circle was small. He didn't prepare notes. He didn't wear anything special. He simply showed up. "I used to think I was only real when I was saving something," he began. "But I've learned that presence, just being with someone, or with myself, is its own kind of rescue." He paused, looked around the room. "And I'm not here because I figured it out. I'm here because I stopped running from the part of me that didn't have answers." Afterward, no one applauded. No one rushed to shake his hand. But a few people stayed behind. One man cried softly. Another asked if they could sit in silence together for a while. And so they did. At home that night, he wrote only one sentence in his journal. "Today I didn't need to be someone else." And it was enough. Michael still missed parts of his old life. He missed the rush, the clarity, the urgency, but those longings no longer steered him. They passed through him like wind through branches noticed but not clung to. His relationship with Ethan shifted too. Their conversations were lighter, less strained. There was no longer an unspoken pressure to impress or advise. They talked about books, dogs, even bad movies. One night Ethan said, "You sound different, Dad, like not trying so hard." Michael laughed. "Maybe because I'm not." It wasn't about arriving at some perfect version of himself. It was about staying with what was real, even when it was quiet, even when it was small. And in that stillness, something unexpected emerged. Not a new role, not a reinvention, but something deeper, belonging. Not to a job, not to a title, but to life itself. There was a moment one morning, unplanned, unspectacular, when Michael stood at his kitchen sink, rinsing a mug. The dog snored softly in the corner. Outside, the sky was soft with early fog. The world was quiet, and for once, so was he. He wasn't thinking about who he used to be. He wasn't wishing for purpose or legacy. He wasn't performing. He was simply here, hands wet, feet grounded, breath steady. And in that stillness he felt something like peace. Not the kind that comes with achievement or applause, but the kind that comes when you stop needing to be seen in order to believe you exist. He had not reinvented himself. He had not built something new to replace the old. He had simply made room for grief, for stillness, for presence, for being. And that was enough. If you've ever found yourself on the other side of a role, a title, a relationship, staring into the quiet, wondering what's left, this is your reminder there is still life here, still breath, still you. You are not your job. You are not your usefulness. You are not your past. You are what remains when everything else falls away. So maybe today, sit for 5 minutes. No answers, no titles, no one watching. Just sit with your own company. And if you feel uncomfortable, that's okay. Discomfort is not failure. It's the space before becoming. And when you're ready, join us in the next video. We'll explore how to gently start again, not by climbing back into a role, but by stepping forward from a deeper place. You don't need to be spectacular. You just need to be real. That's where your new life begins. If no one ever calls you by your title again, if your achievements fade, your role retires, your name isn't remembered in rooms you once lit up, would you still know who you are? It's a question many avoid until life strips away the armor. Until the house is quiet, the inbox is empty, the hands that once reached for you have let go. But maybe that's not the end of you. Maybe that's the beginning. We spend so much of our lives building an identity the world can recognize. We forget there's a self the world never sees, soft, silent, enduring. The part of you that remains even when you're not needed. the part that doesn't need applause to breathe. That's what Michael found, not a reinvention, but a return. Not a new label, but a slower rhythm. Not a role, but a presence. And maybe that's what's waiting for all of us beneath the noise. So if you're sitting in the quiet, unsure of who you are now, don't rush to fill the silence. Listen to it. There's something sacred in that space. Because what you are beneath the role might finally be who you've always been.